Good morning and welcome to Baltic Media Health Check presentation. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your patience. My name is Dace Lamberte and I'm the director of Center for Media Studies at Stockholm School of Economics in Riga. Our center focuses on three areas: investigative reporting, sustainability and media management, and network and capacity building. And even though our geographical focus is wide, our home base is Riga, Latvia. And from time to time, when my colleagues or myself, when we have conversations with media managers, journalists, it seems like the situation is, how to say it correct, not great. Media lack money, media lack resources. However, in order to measure the temperature, how good or bad it is, we need to look at the data in the first place. So this is the 8th time the center does the Baltic Media Health Check journalistic analysis. And this wouldn't be possible without our editor and the authors team. This is the collaborative work among all three Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. So thank you all authors who have contributed throughout the years. Even though our focus here today is the Baltics, we'll also be looking at the media health and trends in a broader perspective. We have a special guest. Nic Newman is here from Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. His journalistic study, Journalism, Media and Technology Trends and Predictions 2024, was published just a few days ago. And thank you, Nic, for finding time to join us today and share your findings. Also, thanks to Kantar and Gemius, who have contributed to the data. To sum up, you will be able to download the publication on our website. So I'm talking about Baltic Media Health Check publication, starting from Monday, January 15th. We are looking forward to hearing your feedback. But now let's move to the presentations. I give a floor, actually the screen, to Aija Krūtaine and Anastasija. Welcome.
Hi, welcome. So the director said that we have to be close because when we will show the presentation, then the screen will be small. But good morning to everyone who has joined. I'm very pleased here to be here. So my name is Aija Krūtaine. I'm the editor of Baltic Media Health Check, and here's my colleague Anastasija Tetarenko-Supe, with whom together we have worked long hours and many nights and days to bring you this report. I hope you all feel well relaxed and you're ready for the Oscars of the Baltic media industry. So the presentation is it moving? Okay. So very briefly, we will go through summary of changes in the finances and audiences. We will give you some trends and highlights that we gathered from interviews with media executives, and we will also have some points for the future outlook. So for those who are new, how the Baltic Media Health Check works is that we look at top 5 most popular media titles in the main 5 categories of media channels. So it's TV, it's online, it's radio, it's print magazines and print newspapers. We rank them based on the data that we receive from our partner, which is Kantar and Gemius. And then we look at who are the owners, like what has happened with their finances and so on. And so for 2020, which is the year on which this report focuses, pretty much we have these 75 outlets were owned by 42 companies, and of those, 36 managed to increase revenues. As you know, 2022 was a year with the super high inflation when the costs and everything soared. And this is the first year in the history of all these 8 reports that I've done when actually I've seen so good result that 70%, 75% these media companies have managed to increase their sales. And 31 made a profit, which is also a very good result. Everyone is always interested in the largest and most profitable companies of the Baltic media. And so here we can see a list of top 5 ranked by the turnover and also by their profit. And we are looking only at the commercial media here in these tables. So as you can see by turnover, it's pretty much TV broadcasting companies plus Postimees Group and Delfi Media in like Estonian businesses who also have subsidiaries in all 3 countries and do their business online and also in print, and Postimees Group also, for example, like TV. And then when we look at the profitability, then we see that this top 5 companies with the highest profit is also pretty much dominated by the TV broadcasters, for whom the 2020 was a very good year in the Baltic countries due to the fact that the war broke out. I mean, people wanted to know more about what's going on in Ukraine, and also the fact that the Russian channels were banned in the Baltics. In the audiences, I wouldn't say that we see a lot of changes. I mean, we always write these numbers down, but pretty much majority of the outlets saw their audiences falling. And for some, it increased. As in the previous years, online and TV are actually the ones that mostly increased their audiences. As I mentioned, it's driven pretty much by the uncertainty that the war in Ukraine created. Oh, and then already, sorry, yeah, okay. And then like looking slightly at the top and how it actually looks. So what we can see here is most viewed TV channels in the Baltic countries ranked by their viewing share of viewing. And in Latvia and Estonia, public broadcasters are the ones that have the top position, while in Lithuania it's TV3 Group. Total viewing time increased for most. Daily reach actually fell for everybody, and we think that this indicates that the popularity of linear TV is declining, which we have been observing, of course, for quite some time, and that the audience goes to other sources like YouTube or streaming platforms to watch television. The biggest change in this top is that before, like in the last report, which was 2020 and 2021, is that in Latvia and Lithuania, we had quite a few Russian TV channels represented in this top, but with the ban of these channels, we see that in Latvia, pretty much TV is dominated by the TV3 Group, and it's the same in Estonia, like and overall, like across the Baltics, so TV3 is dominating the market with 6. No, well, yeah. Next slide. Okay. Then online, of course, is another category which still sees an increase in the audience. And here, no big changes, in a sense that Delfi is still the king in all 3 countries. There are some changes in Estonia where Postimees has slipped their position, but it's also might be due to the fact that simply the data is incomplete, as they are not sharing it anymore. And so on. And then, okay, sorry. Radio. Lithuania's M1 commercial radio is the one that leads when it comes to radio stations. And in Latvia and Estonia, the most listened to radio station is the one of the public broadcasters. Okay, and when it comes to the newspapers, top one as well here has remained the same. So pretty much in all these, like the breakdown, when we look at each segments, that the market leaders have remained the same. There haven't been changes in those. I mean, what has changed in some, but not all cases, is a little bit the positions of which, like, where the media is placed. But there is one very big notable newcomer in the newspaper segment, in the most popular newspaper segment in Lithuania, and that's the business daily Verslo žinios, which has made it straight to the top 2 position. And another thing which I would like to mention here is the fact that of course, maintaining circulations is a big problem for newspapers and overall print media. But it's also what we see is that frequency declines, in a sense that if newspapers were published in the past 6 days a week, then now there are newspapers which are published like once a week, 2 times a week, or 3 times a week. And pretty much now we only have 4 newspapers that still publish 5 times a week. Not always is the choice of the publisher, because actually in Estonia in 2020, the distributor said that he will not deliver newspapers to retail outlets on Mondays, and that basically forced the publishers to reduce the frequency of their newspapers. Okay, and then when looking at the magazines as well here, well, the top is the same. And there are some, 3 out of 5 magazines have grown their cover, and that's Savaitė Oho and Namir Soda in Lithuania, and in Estonia it was TU, but not much of a thing. And then I will give floor to Anastasija, who will give a little bit more about the highlights and trends in each country.
Greetings to everyone. And looking back at what was learned during the interviews with media representatives, it can be said that 2022 was a good year for media businesses in terms of revenues in Latvia. Successive crises created difficulties in media business planning, but as the crisis subsided, the media advertising market finally surpassed pre-pandemic levels. Huge changes in media landscape after the ban of Russian media skyrocketed the demands of the advertisement, sequentially rising the prices. And realizing that media users are no longer ready to divide their attention between multiple platforms, the media are increasingly working on bundling products. At the same time, a wider range of sources of income is sought. Also, the last turbulent years raised the issue of the well-being of media workers, as well as the amount of work and stress has increased significantly. In Estonia, media managers also looked at the company's achievements through the lens of the crisis. Largely thanks to the loyalty of the audiences and the habit of paying for media content, companies managed to overcome crisis relatively successfully and also even grow their subscriber base. At the same time, the very rapid inflation has caused advertising and subscriber prices to rise. Taking into account the competition in the field of media advertising with the global media giants, media managers in Estonia see the need to conclude cooperation agreements with large social media players. Diversification of companies' activities has allowed to increase revenues while creating new services and products that allow to cover a wider audience and also to sell advertising. It doesn't seem fair for commercial media that the states invest a lot of money in the public media in a situation where the commercial media is trying to teach the audience to pay for the content that costs money. But if we look at Lithuania, the media have been looking for ways to more successfully increase the number of audience and subscribers, concluding that the collected data allow providing a personalized approach and offer to customers. And the special attention to data has also made it possible to create new journalistic products, predicting also that data products will occupy an increasingly important place in the media business. Fierce competition with media giants has forced the media to actively work on business diversification, which also helps to develop in conditions of economic uncertainty that we have experienced the last years. And the media rely less and less on advertising as the main source of income, and emphasis is placed on growing the subscriber base, and it is also understood that a larger proportion of content placed behind the paywall brings more revenue.
Okay. Here I will take over from Anastasija and talk briefly about my personally favorite highlight of this report is and it's about subscriptions and basically how many digital subscribers are there media have managed to gather. And like in the Baltic countries, a widespread introduction of paywalls started only back in 2019. Yes, Estonians did it first. They did it in 2012, 2013. But like in Latvia and Lithuania, the market followed only in 2019. And back then, when I very clearly remember that when it started, of course, people were saying, why to pay for content online? And expressing also their, not criticism, but kind of doubting the fact that actually it will become an important source of revenues for the media businesses. But now, 3-4 years later, we see that the digital subscriber numbers are growing. And as you can see, then in Latvia, back at October, November of 2020, there were approximately 9,300 subscriptions overall in the market. In Lithuania, it was 4,600. And then now in Latvia, they're like now meaning September, October for when we have the compiled data, it's 35,000 subscriptions in Latvia and 70,000 subscriptions in Lithuania. In Estonia, the number is much, much higher. It's 152,000. But there's also one point which has to be taken into account, the fact that actually Postimees Group's data is not part of this because they don't share it anymore. And back in November 2020, they had 37,000 digital subscribers. And I mean, if suddenly they have only remained the same, then the subscription numbers, the total subscriptions in the market in Estonia should be definitely at least 200,000. And Delphi is the market leader in all 3 countries. And also another thing which I like personally, don't ask me why, but I guess I simply like ambitions, and the ambition of the media outlets in the Baltic countries is that in the next 3 to 5 years, actually most plan to double or triple their digital subscriber numbers, and some are aiming for 100,000 subscribers. For a market the size of a Baltics, I think that is fantastic for the media, for them to stay competitive and be able to get reader revenue, basically, and become less dependent from advertising.
Also, we wanted to look at the landscape of Russian media and Russian-speaking audiences in Latvia, because here in Latvia we have actually a huge Russian-speaking population. And after the start of the war, Russian-related content became toxic, prompting advertisers to withdraw their support from broadcasters that aired Russian TV programs. And the media landscape in Latvia changed significantly after the ban on Russian media. However, neither local nor foreign substitutes that were introduced into TV packages have managed to even come close to the size of the audience left behind by Kremlin media. Latvian officials were, I don't know, too naive or uninformed, hoping that in the absence of Kremlin media, local Russian speakers would surprisingly definitely switch to Latvian media. It didn't happen, and the Russian independent media, which found refuge in Latvia after fleeing Russia, didn't help either. Despite the expectations, it was possible to conclude that independent Russian media in exile don't really care for locals, and they address Russians in Russia, not in the Baltic states and in Latvia in particular. Meanwhile, at least some locals seek their anti-heroes on alternative, easily accessible platforms like Telegram, or they use VPN services to get to the banned content. But a large part of Russian speakers avoid news media altogether and disappear from the radars.
Mm-hmm. And then the final points of our presentation, we will give you some ideas of the future, of what to expect, kind of. We have, so if we think about challenges which are there in the market and which media have to kind of navigate through, number one, of course, is the AI. It's the hot topic of the industry. Everybody wants to make it work, but at the same time, the question is how to make it work in newsrooms so that it doesn't undermine trust. The tension between social media and the businesses is there, right? Media want, especially with phasing out of cookies and other like changes in the algorithms and so on, media wants actually more audience come to them. But the data shows that majority of traffic, or definitely a significant part of the traffic to media websites, comes from social media. Decline in the audiences will continue. I mean, so far what we see from the report that it hasn't had really a dramatic effect on, let's say, revenues and overall viability of the companies. At least if we talk about broadcasters and online and print, and others, like print, yes, they're the companies which used to have big turnovers and so on have decreased. Another topic, of course, is fluctuations in the advertising market, like what we saw in pandemic and also at the breakout of the war. Advertisers are very quick to plug out money if they feel uncertain. And two another more important points are, one is about data collection. So we heard from the interviews with executives that there is unhappiness, let's put it that way, about how certain things are measured. I mean, TV is definitely one of the topics, one of the areas where it's I would say, the most acute. Felt, because I mean the data doesn't measure the streaming services and how many people, let's say, watch television on their computers, but online is also an issue, especially in Estonia, where the panel of media outlets that are being measured is actually reducing, and another thing is the rivalry between the public and commercial media. I mean, the tension is there. And it is likely to only grow stronger as commercial media put more paywall behind more content behind the paywall, right? And then there, of course, is the public media, which puts a lot of content out there for free. And yes, not happy. Commercial media are definitely not happy about the budgets and everything with how they have to compete with the public service media.
And if we would like to look at future, then we could say that market consolidation is likely to continue, because as the data shows, media companies with a wider portfolio are more likely to be successful. Baltic countries can't escape the global trends that are increasingly going towards constructive journalism and explainers. And these formats of media content is not widely used in Latvian media now. Changes in media consumption habits will continue to drive media companies towards bundling of digital subscriptions, also with with other services, also offering positive benefits or bonuses to clients. And unlike initial prognosis, subscription numbers will continue to rise. confirming the need for quality content in the environment of information overload. Also, media content, we think that media content will be more diverse and niche-oriented, allowing to grow audience numbers. And of course, we all liked Netflix without advertisement, but it seems like these times are over. And in the nearest future, Netflix and other sector players, maybe also local players, will bring the advertisements in your binge watching experience, or you will be just forced to pay more. So we will see where it goes.
Mm-hmm. And that's it from us. We have actually a bit gone over the time, so I will give the floor to Nic Newman. The only thing which I would like to mention is that please, if you have any questions, go on Slido, #BMHC 2023, and we will get them and we will answer them after the Nic's presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nic, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Really interesting and really good to be here. So I'm Nic Newman. I'm involved in two big reports for the Reuters Institute each year. So there's the Digital News Report, which is an annual survey of consumption trends. It comes out every June. And then this one, which came out a couple of days ago and looks at journalism and technology trends in the year ahead. And it's based on an industry survey of around 300 editors, CEOs, digital leaders in more than 50 countries, including the Baltic states. And we ask executives, what their priorities are for the year and what's keeping them up at night. And I should say that, representatives of print, broadcast, digital-born brands. So firstly, if we look at confidence in the year ahead, we find that less than half of the media say that they're confident, or about half say they're not sure, or are distinctly unconfident. And driving that low confidence is instability in advertising revenues, worries about the end of cookies. We've heard about that already. Slowing subscription growth, so subscription growth but slowing. Decline in traffic linked to falling referral traffic. So you can hear here the global director of AFP really summarizing what they see in a lot of their partners. And then, of course, there's political instability and what's coming in terms of that disruption, which you heard about already from artificial intelligence. So one relatively bright spot, you've heard about it already in your own Baltic Media Check, is the growth of subscriptions. And despite the really difficult economic outlook last year, we did see growth, some growth, continued growth, but at a slower rate broadly than in the previous year in most countries, not necessarily in the Baltic countries. It's also interesting to note that Northern Europe generally and the Nordics are absolutely the leaders in digital subscription, freemium models mainly, and they are way ahead of the rest of the world, including the United States, in terms of the percentage of people who subscribe. In terms, the problem, of course, is that digital growth is not necessarily going to be enough to make up for the declines in audience and revenues from declining broadcast and declining print. And this is a pretty typical comment that we heard from our publishers. So digital growth broadly growing a bit, but stagnating, and print is really in trouble. The problems mounting up both on the sales side and the distribution side. So that's obviously a real struggle. We asked about the most important revenue streams across these 300 different media companies. And what you see there is subscription right at the top, still considered the most important. And we've seen that growing compared with advertising over the last 5 years or so. So it used to be advertising number one, subscription lower down. Now subscriptions are the most important. And the other point about this chart is that there are now many, many different revenue streams that media companies depend on. So it really is about this point about diversification. Most of the publishers we talked to said that they are relying on 2, 3, or 4 different revenue streams increasingly, but subscription is definitely the focus for most of them right now. In terms of the year ahead and some of the trends that we're seeing, Similar to you, it's about the bundle in 2024. So we've seen the New York Times, of course, famously with their bundle, putting together non-news products like cooking and product reviews and games, and combining it with news. And the basic idea behind that is that it's much harder to leave if you don't just subscribe to news. So this idea that bundle subscribers retain and monetize much better than news-only subscribers. And again, Northern Europe, Nordic countries is really where a lot of the bundling activity is happening. In Norway and Sweden, most of the big companies are doing this. They are combining magazines, local, national, paid podcasts into a single bundle to make it easier and harder to leave as well. The other thing that we're seeing is the growth of some low-cost product extensions. So this may be you subscribe to a podcast bundle or a little briefing set like the FT Edit or the Economist at the beginning of the day. And the idea about this is getting to people who aren't prepared to pay the full amount. Differential pricing is coming to Europe, so started in the US. So people paying different amounts of money for the same product, whatever they can afford, similar to how we have it in the airline business or in hotels. And then I think the other really interesting thing is television companies now starting to try and create premium products as they see their traditional markets decline. So potentially CNN this year, with Mark Thompson taking over, will start subscription products. But you also have really big digital global providers like Mail Online for the first time adding a premium freemium model to its advertising model. So one of the things that we've heard about already, and you've talked about already, is the significant decline in referrals from traditional social networks like Facebook and Twitter. And this is what it looks like. So this is an aggregate picture that we sourced for our report from the analytics company Chartbeat, which measures 2,000 media companies and referrals to those companies across different countries. And what you see here is a 48% decline in referrals to publishers from Facebook, on top of a pretty significant decline the previous year. And it's not just Facebook, I mean, much less important, but Twitter also down 27% this year. So this is a really sort of significant concern. And we asked you about strategies. 63% of our respondents said they were really concerned about this. And we asked about, well, what are you going to do about it? What strategies do you have to compensate for this lack of referrals from social media? And for most publishers, it's really about trying to build these direct relationships, more direct traffic. Of course, this is much easier said than done. Many people are cutting costs, and then others are really investing in alternative platforms more. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. But, you know, this is the CEO and editor-in-chief of a Norwegian newspaper, tabloid newspaper. They are prioritizing the direct traffic, of course, but they also recognize that younger people are not necessarily going to go directly. So they need to also really focus on alternative platforms like Snapchat or TikTok, places where young people are spending their time. So one of the questions we ask is where, in terms of those alternative platforms, where are people going to be spending more time? Where are they going to be spending less time? And this is one of my favorite charts in the survey. It's a net score. So people who say they're going to put more effort into particular platforms, and then we take away ones that say they're going to put less effort. You see WhatsApp at the top. I'll talk about that in a minute. TikTok and YouTube. So these sort of video platforms are becoming much more important, more focus on them, more format development for those platforms. Search, of course, remains really important for publishers. People worried about what might happen to search traffic, but at the moment, search traffic remains critical with social media traffic failing. And then many publishers have just given up on Facebook and X or Twitter, as you can see there. So there's a real shift from this sort of post and refer model into a model where you have to create bespoke, different content for some of these youth-based platforms and really engage much, much more deeply. So I talked about WhatsApp. This is where publishers are really focusing. And the reason is that Meta have launched these channels. So giving publishers the opportunity to create content, broadcast effectively into WhatsApp. You can't comment, but you can do these emojis. And of course, people can pull stories into their own private chats. And we see many different, it is now rolled out to 120 countries, I think. But you see, publishers like New York Times just focusing on news, but you also see others who are focusing more on niche strategies. So here's the Daily Mail with the Kardashians WhatsApp channel. They've got many WhatsApp channels, and each of those is really targeting passions and groups of interest. So I think WhatsApp is going to be interesting. It won't replace Facebook, of course, in terms of the referral traffic. So I think the big worry, of course, is that what's happened to social media is going to happen to search this year because of the disruption of AI. And I'm sure you've seen the rollout of these search experiments that Google and others have been doing. Of course, it's more than an experiment for Microsoft and Bing. So essentially, within the interface, you can now ask a question and get an answer back directly. And there are far fewer links to media companies. So the fear is that there's going to be fewer links and less referral from search, which will be very serious for the business models, of course. And here's a publisher in Argentina talking about how they see this as an existential threat. Smaller publishers that rely in particular on external traffic or distributed traffic, potentially in much more difficulty. And of course, it's not just search, it's also a range of new conversational ways to access information that we didn't have before. So we've seen, AI chatbots like Perplexity, which I use most days now to ask questions, which you can have as a Chrome browser. This is one called Pi. So you can just ask it about the latest news. What's the latest news in Gaza? And you can do a follow-up chat. And of course, there's literally no references to a publisher brand, no possibility to click through to a publisher brand. So not surprisingly, that many publishers are trying to fight back or work out what they can do about this. The New York Times, of course, is suing OpenAI and Microsoft. It argues that whole sections of its content have been lifted verbatim and are used by OpenAI, for example, and also that effectively these new chatbots are directly competing for trusted news with organizations like the New York Times in an unfair way. So it's going to be really interesting to see how those legal battles pan out this year. And of course, other publishers are doing deals. So Axel Springer has done a deal, and AP, the news agency, has also done a big deal. But our publishers essentially are worried that they won't see much of the money at the end of the day. It won't be substantial enough to make up for the loss of that traffic, or that most of the money will go to big media companies that shout the loudest, like Axel Springer and the New York Times. So I think real concerns, as we've seen before, in terms of that power balance between the platforms and the publishers as AI disruption really sort of kicks in. If we look at artificial intelligence in the newsroom, we asked about the different ways in which publishers were using it and for news and themselves within the newsroom for efficiency, for example. And this is a stacked rack chart of the most important ways in which publishers are using it. So firstly, back-end transcription, copy editing, automation of different types is the most important. 56% say this is very important to them this year, followed by distribution and recommendations. And it's interesting that a couple of years ago when we asked this question, it was the other way around. So it was about, how can we do better recommendations? And automation was on the back burner. But of course, the better technology, the generative AI has really made efficiency, the number one priority for many publishers. And then you have content creation, commercial uses, coding and development, news gathering. So many different ways in which artificial intelligence is going to transform what journalism is. Mostly on that back end side, as I say, but here are 4 examples of how publishers are using artificial intelligence on the front end in terms of product change. So in Nordic countries in particular, you have the emergence of little text summaries, artificial intelligence produced text summaries at the top of stories. This is Aftonbladet in Sweden. VG is doing it as well, NRK in Norway. So at the top of the stories, you have these little summaries. And what they've found is it really increases the engagement that people feel. It's not sort of cannibalizing it. It's really helping with that problem of engagement we talked about. Second example is automated graphics. So in this case, using tools like Midjourney to put a style for a German newspaper on top of So you don't need to employ a graphic artist anymore. You can just do this through AI. Another German newspaper has created an artificial intelligence reporter called Clara Indenat. So she's not real. She writes now 5% of all of their stories. This is quite a controversial move. Of course, all of this is checked by a human, but it's written by the artificial intelligence. And we also have now 24-hour television stations. So News GPT, there's another one called Channel 1.ai, and essentially it is producing content in any language, automated or semi-automated, and offering, I think, that will bring real disruption to television media over the next 5 years or so. Of course, there's a reputational risk and trust issues. And when we ask people which of these 5 categories carries the most reputational risk, it is content creation that people are most concerned about, because of that concern about the integrity of content and trust, as well as news gathering. People are much less concerned about back-end automation, distribution, commercial uses, and coding from a reputational risk point of view. And here's a head of digital at Times in London. Again, I think this is the consensus. The most compelling user case this year is about back-end automation tasks. We do not believe that AI should be used for reporting stories. Not everyone agrees with that, but I think that's the consensus right now. And I think as a result, this year, the focus is going to be on augmenting newsrooms, augmenting journalists, with a whole load of new tools to support journalists in decision-making, but also to drive a lot of efficiency. So in Finland, this is just one example of the kind of tools that we're going to see more of. In Finland, in Helsinki and Sanomat, they have a little AI concierge or tool that helps the journalist, that is built into the content management system. And you write a story and it's suggesting how you might want to illustrate it, or some links you might want to put into it, or how you might want to change the language. In Sweden, Aftonbladet have a youth assistant, again, part of the content management system. And it just reminds journalists to write stories in a simpler way, use simpler language that might be understood by an 18-year-old, for example. So it's this kind of prompt or nudges to try and help journalists deliver something that's more relevant to audiences. And then just finally, in terms of artificial intelligence, and I think you mentioned this in your presentation, the whole question about what this is going to do for trust. People fear that we're going to have this flood of synthetic content, unreliable news, bad actors, particularly, in the light of the Ukraine conflict, for example, creating more propaganda and misinformation in social media using artificial intelligence. And we have seen this. Obviously, it's a huge year for elections, 40 democratic elections in major countries this year. And 70% of our respondents to the survey think that AI and generative AI is going to lower overall trust levels in the news. And that obviously potentially has concerns for business models as well. We've seen in the Argentinian elections, huge amount of artificial intelligence used, not always trying to mislead. I mean, some of it's just used for illustrative purposes, but some of it to mislead. In the US election, we've already had campaign videos that mix real footage and footage that has been manipulated by artificial intelligence within official campaign videos, like this Ron DeSantis video. And here's a senior executive in Germany saying, the explosion of crap content has the potential to shake trust in media, but the hope that maybe it will allow some trusted media to differentiate itself so people will come back to trusted media. That may, of course, be wishful thinking. So just to finish, a few key questions for 2024. How far and fast will AI really disrupt these business models? Will those negotiations over rights ultimately benefit media companies, or is it just going to benefit the big media companies, the big countries, and leave the others out in the cold? And how do we embrace the benefits of artificial intelligence, the efficiency gains, and how do we manage the risks? The whole question of trust and synthetic media, and the opportunities for journalism to really double down on trust and distinguish itself from the flood of unreliable content. What to do about those declining referrals, how is it possible to strengthen those direct relationships? I mean, that's really the heart of what media companies need to do over the next 5 years. And then I think a really interesting question, we focus so much on sort of websites, apps, front pages, but how do we move out from that as consumers get more interested in different formats, in video, in podcasts, in newsletters, and bots? There are so many other ways that we're going to need to learn to tell stories and to really engage our consumers going forwards. And I should say that all of the slides from this are available from our website for free, and I'm sure we can distribute them after this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nic, for this for your presentation. We have a few questions come in, and I think I will start with those ones which might be relevant, well, to which you might answer. The number one is like, with Europe rapidly aging, isn't this push into TikTok a bit overreaction, just like the previous love affairs with Facebook and Twitter? What is your thoughts on this?
Yeah, there is literally no silver bullets to the problems of the media. It's not as, it used to be, okay, well, Facebook's the answer and TikTok's the answer. And I think we're beyond that now. I mean, effectively, the answer is you have to build long-term relationships with consumers that make them, that you have to provide long-term value. There is no quick fix. On the other hand, I think TikTok is interesting from another number of points of view. So whether it's TikTok or anything else, the sort of short form video formats, the compressed way and creative way in which people are telling stories in video now is not going to go away, and it's a valid and important change, and we need to embrace that within our own environments as well as through social networks. But I think generally we just need to be much more intentional about how we use different networks. So we need to, primary strategy, build direct relationships. Secondary strategy, if you want to reach specific audiences and if you want to reach younger audiences, then TikTok and YouTube right now are where you need to be.
Okay, you mentioned these direct relationships with the readers, but what are the ways how media can do this, and actually like how successful they have been? Because I think it's like usually it's right, media are the ones that tell you what is what. And yeah,
I mean, this is the $1 million question. I mean, this is what everyone wants to do, as you saw in the slides, to build those direct relationships. It's really hard to do in a media ecosystem, which is all about fragmentation right now, and where there's a power imbalance between the platforms, because consumers are voting with their feet for convenience, and they don't feel there's enough value coming directly from going to a media company every day. I mean, 10% do, the small percentage do, but the vast majority of people are just voting with their feet for convenience. So we have to improve our product fundamentally, and that means, being much more audience-centric. A lot of media companies are thinking about, user needs rather than just sort of bombarding people with negative news, actually providing a more mixed diet, constructive journalism. You mentioned yourself in the report. I think, people are really worried about news avoidance and news fatigue in general. And that traditional media agenda that worked with older people really is not working with people under 35. They're looking for more hope, more agency. And so there's a problem with the product itself, which we need to take seriously.
I'm not sure whether you can answer this question, but one which several people of our audience have liked is that what data is needed to train the AI models to drive better recommendations, both on content and advertising? Any ideas?
I think one of the, we sort of focus a lot on the platforms, and there's clearly going to be platform AI, like Pi or Perplexity or sort of through Google, and that's going to do a great job. But when we're talking about, we're all going to see specific trained models. So using those wider models, but a lot of media companies are essentially saying, well, let's train something on our own data or on a specific set of data. And we're going to see a lot more of that in the next year, where we have more control. We understand what's going on, and we can control the interface and control, these so-called hallucinations and really understand what's going on. So I think that's going to be a real area of focus, and a lot of the value in news, I think, is going to be in training in more specific areas.
Any predictions on the effect of the EMFA and the AI Act on media operations in the future? I mean, I think that's the big new.
It's very hard to predict regulation and the effect of regulation, because as we've seen in many cases, we have unintended consequences because we don't really understand the problems, or the problems are really complex and we try and regulate, and that creates additional problems. But I think there is a general acceptance that we need AI regulation of some kind. We need better understanding, better transparency. We need ways of making sure that the media, which is really important to support democratic institutions, has sustainable business models and doesn't get suddenly disrupted out of existence. So I think regulation is a good idea. I think how we do it and the impact of it is not yet clear. And it's really important, not just around sort of the business side, but also around some of these issues of trust as well. We know that we can't rely on the platforms themselves to self-regulate on some of these things. That will only go so far. We also need to make sure that they live up to their promises, or that there are consequences for those platforms if things go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And then another question is about, have you noticed in your survey of media executives, what are the trends for small local media outlets? Or
it's very hard to talk about small local in the abstract, because different countries have very different cultures. So in countries like Norway, you still have really strong local, and the bundling, I think, is really, really helping there as well. But I mean, primarily it's much harder for small organizations operating on their own to deal with this massive fragmented problem. So I think one of the things we are seeing is sort of national and local sort of coming together. I think that will be a trend. We're also seeing sort of new models of much smaller, much lower cost bases. So like local newsletters, for example, who are able to, you don't have to fill a newspaper every day or every week. You can, fill 3 or 4 stories and still provide real value, using community much more. So I think some new, really interesting models for local are emerging, and it may not be a huge problem if, the traditional legacy local media disappears, or part of it disappears, because there may be better ways to deliver local news in this new environment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Nic. There are other, Anastasija has a question for you.
I wanted to thank you for your brilliant presentation and super interesting data. I wanted to ask, for example, the media in Baltics that usually are following the trends, not creating them, should be worried that big media from outside our countries decide to conquer our media environment with the help of artificial intelligence, create the content with this AI tools, and enter our media environments and pose, a threat to our journalists, our media outlets. Is this a risk for our media environment, in your opinion?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a huge risk for your media environment. On the other hand, I think that small countries protected by language have been generally less disrupted than some of the big, English-speaking markets, for example, where we've seen massive fragmentation and real sort of shift of power so, a lot of the disruption has happened first in sort of English-speaking markets, and we have really seen, I think, one of the other advantages of small markets, like Norway, Sweden, Finland, very small number of publishers, like you have in many of the Baltic markets, who really control the market. You can do bundling, you can control more aspects of it. Whereas in a market like the UK, you have, literally hundreds of media companies competing with themselves and competing with the platforms. So I think you have a number of structural benefits, and traditionally in many of the Nordic markets, certainly you've seen much less disruption by platforms in general, because the platforms weren't interested in your markets because they were very late into the markets or didn't really focus on those markets, and that has given the publishers actually more power to control certain aspects that previously platforms might have done. So there has been less disruption. There's more direct traffic, for example, in Nordic countries, much more than there is in many Latin American markets, for example, where it's very, very dependent on distribution. They're in a much worse position. So I think you have a number of advantages, but AI is going to disrupt a lot of things.
Okay. Thank you, Nic. We have some more questions about the Baltics. I just wanted to also mention to all those who are watching this interview that watching this presentation that we have an interview with Nic in our report, where he also talks more in detail about some of the issues raised here today. But then I will go to Anastasija. And so one of the questions is about how do you explain the trend that Russian-speaking audiences avoid news media?
I would like to, I really would like to answer this question with big data and give you a clear answer, but actually there are no qualitative data that would allow to give a clear answer, because this is a new trend and the scholars will only get the information later. But we can see that people are getting tired of negativity, and also it takes time to change media consumption habits. So it is quite possible that Russian speakers are now just navigating the new situation, the new environment, and looking for the refuge in these times of uncertainty, that how they are describing this situation. So even if those Russian speakers are not watching, I don't know, Latvian public broadcasters news, it doesn't automatically mean that they are pro-Kremlin or other political oriented. So this is the question that could be answered later when scholars or others will get qualitative data from the audience itself.
Okay. Then another question is, even though not very popular, are there media outlets shifting more towards constructive journalism in Baltics?
We would like to think that yes, but as we understand that qualitative journalism is expensive, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of money. We see that, for example, the Latvian state has recognized the problem of disinformation, which is connected with the lack of quality information, and the state is granting the money to the media to create quality content while also debunking false information. But I think that there is a trend starting in at least online media with storytelling. For example, in Delphi, I think there is a new
Format?
new format in Delphi for storytellers that are explaining in more detail some problems that arise in public discourse.
No, just very briefly, for me, what I've seen is that there are separate experiments of how to do it, a little bit more explainers and so on. But I wouldn't say that, for example, constructive journalism is really a trend in the Baltics yet. Yeah, so I think we will see that most likely in the 2 or 3 years coming in.
We can see that some media are trying to create relationships with the audience, but these relationships and the content that the media is creating, it is quite difficult to say that this is quality journalism. It just there are strong relationships between the media and the audience, and I think high level of trust towards this media, but there is this distinction whether this could be named as a quality journalism.
We are almost out of time, but I will do one last very briefly. The question about small local trends media outlets here is one thing which I would like to mention is that what we see from the report, Lithuania is very, very active. Like in that sense, like all media startups, kind of new people, journalists going away from their jobs and so on, and making new media. We see it there more actively than in Latvia and Estonia. And then the last thing also about the impressive digital number growth for Lithuania from 4,600 to 70K. Any guess why? One of the reasons is that actually Latvia was the first to start introducing the paid content, and Lithuania did it a little bit later. So these first numbers I had was from October 2020, right? So that's just one thing. But then when it comes to why the increase has been so big is that what we also mentioned in our presentation, that media companies are the ones that have paywall, they are putting more content behind the paywall. I mean, when it started back in 2019, like everybody was saying, only 2% of content behind the paywall and similar, but now these numbers are increasing. And that means that more people are actually seeing the paywalled content, right? And that also means that more of them are deciding to become subscribers. So I would say that is my guess. Yeah. And sorry, we're already a few minutes past 12. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. A special thanks to Nic Newman for joining and yeah, giving us interesting thoughts about the future to think. And so the report will be available on the SSC Riga Media site on Monday. We will send you to everybody who registered. We will also send the link where you can download it. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.